Sorry, we should be broadcasting. We are broadcasting now. Order, order. Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Thursday, the 24th of April 2025. In September 2020, the Department for Education launched T-levels as a new technical qualifications aimed at supporting young people into skilled employment and bridging chronic skills gaps across the economy. The department has since introduced 21 T-levels, 16 of which were introduced in line with the original timetable. However, the number of students enrolled into courses as at September 24 was less than half the department's initial estimates. So alongside low student numbers, concerns have also been raised about declining pass rates, the challenges of securing industry placements, and the cost of T-levels compared to other qualifications. So today we'll be questioning our witnesses about their progress in delivering and awarding T-levels and plans for increasing student numbers and realising the benefits of these qualifications. So today, to help us with all that, we're very pleased to welcome our witnesses. Of course, we have Susan Acland-Hood, who's the Permanent Secretary, regular attender at this committee. Welcome, Susan, and thank you. You've been Permanent Secretary since 2020. Julia Kinniburgh, Director of Skills. Julia was appointed Director of Skills for the group in December 2022, I think. Is that right? And previously held the position of Director General for the Strategy Group. Welcome. And from the Institute of Apprenticeships and T-level Education, Carmel Grant, the Interim Chief Executive. Carmel has been acting Chief Executive since February 25, and having previously held the role of Deputy Director for Technical Education. I think, Carmel, this is your first appearance before the committee?
Yes.
You're very welcome indeed. Thank you very much for coming. So we now go straight into the main session when I've got the right piece of paper. Here we go. So I think perhaps, Permanent Secretary, we could start with you. And just as a sort of opener, please, could you tell us how important T-levels are to your wider plans for addressing critical skills gaps within the UK economy?
Thank you very much, Chair. So T-levels are really important to our plan for addressing skills gaps. They're part of a landscape of qualifications and they link very closely to the work of Skills England in assessing skills gaps and identifying the qualifications needed to meet those. T-levels were part of a push to make sure that we were treating technical and vocational education as seriously and thinking about it as much from a quality point of view as we do in academic pathways. In the past, there has been a tendency to see technical and vocational qualifications as a second-rate route or as a residual route for those who couldn't cope with an academic pathway. And T-levels were really explicitly set up to start not from that point of view, but from the point of view of what really high-quality occupational competence would look like in a technical route. They were co-designed with employers, and they were intended to be and are high-quality, high-status qualifications which lead to really good outcomes for the learners who take them. When we do the work on skills mapping, and as Skills England has started to work in shadow form, we know that for different areas of the economy, we need qualifications of different kinds and at different levels. So T-levels aren't the only answer, but they're a really important part of the landscape.
That's fantastic stuff. Thank you very much, and we will be examining a lot of that. Perhaps just as a sort of quick follow-up to that, perhaps go to Carmel Grant. What are you doing to ensure T-levels meet employers' current and future needs? Because my Science Sister College is very, very keen on T-levels and has been right there at the beginning, but they find one of the most difficult aspects of it is getting sufficient employer placements. And of course, unless the employers are satisfied with the scheme, they're not going to want to offer placements for future students. So could you just sort of address some of the problems of finding employer placements?
Yes, thank you. So in terms of addressing employer needs, the T-levels are designed with employers. So right at the beginning of the design, we've had employer panels involved in designing the content and making sure that it's fit for purpose. Also in the development of the T-levels, the awarding organisations that have the contracts for the T-levels, they also are required to bring in employers to ensure that they're meeting the skills needs. So they're always maintaining currency. And we think with that currency, with annual changes to the T-levels to keep them up to date, I think that's giving the confidence for employers who want to offer placements to continue to do that. And indeed, some of the employers that have been involved in the design and development of T-levels are offering placements throughout the country as well. So it's a continual theme of employers being at the heart of the design, the development and the updating. We
absolutely understand that. And I suppose the follow-on question from that, and I don't mind, Susan or Julia, if you answer this, if we get the sort of predicted numbers that you need to really make this success, we're going to need a considerable number of increased placements. Do you think that we are going to be able to achieve that?
I'll take that one, Chair.
Of course.
So yes, we do. So we've seen a growing provision of placements as the programme's matured. So for last year, we had 98% of students who completed their placement. We've been doing an awful lot of work to really support employers in taking on those placements. And what we've actually seen is that once employers take their first students, they really do grow substantially. So we have employers such as Amazon who've gone from a handful to triple figures in the space of a few years. Lloyds Bank done something similar. So once they've had a student in their workplace, they can see the real benefits both to the workplace and also in terms of then often bringing those students through to then work in their companies, often as apprentices. So for those who've completed their placement, a third of them, when they're actually employed, are then employed in the company where they did their placement. So it's really working as a pull-through into those employers. So we've seen really good take-up.
Fantastic news, and I'm sure some of us will want to follow that up a little later on. So, Susan Acland-Hood, how many students need to complete T-levels each year for them to be sustainable and address the skills gaps? And we've seen that some, I'm looking at figure 3, for example, some you've had to withdraw some of the T-levels because of lack of demand. What is, just sort of set the scene for us, if you'd be kind enough to do, how many students you think really for each T-level there needs to be for it to be viable and the whole scheme to be viable?
So we've got about 25,000 students who started T-levels in 2024, which is a hugely significant growth on the just over 1,000 who started in the first year in 2020. And our latest projections look towards somewhere in the region of 60 to 70,000 T-level learners in steady state. So we're making good progress towards that number. As the NAO report set out, and as the committee will know, the growth trajectory hasn't been as rapid as we first projected, but we are now tracking our most recent growth forecasts quite well. So having revised and looked at those again, learning from what we've seen in the early years of the programme, we're confident that we're now forecasting and meeting the forecasts that we've most recently set.
The sort of forecast predicted by the NAO for 2030, are you reasonably confident you will meet those numbers?
Yes.
Good, yes.
And then in terms of what we need across the economy through different routes, again, there's a lot of work going on with Skills England to look at the numbers we need. And it's quite... So there are some areas where the T-level stands alone as the route that's needed to meet that. There are some others where actually what you want is a mixture of people coming through, for example, apprenticeship routes and T-level routes and potentially other classroom-based routes. And we keep that under quite careful review and sit and work through it with employers. And in some cases, the changes to the originally planned T-levels have been about employer feedback about what was needed. So, for example, when we look at the on-site construction T-level, which is one of the ones that we have moved away from, we had about 350 learners going through on-site construction. That's not actually, for the stage it was at, that wasn't a kind of devastatingly low number. We have some other very recently introduced T-levels that have numbers at that size. It was more that the employers said to us they didn't think for on-site construction the T-level was the right pathway, that they wanted more people coming through apprenticeship routes and level 2 routes into on-site construction. And so that kind of not just designing in the first instance with employers, but keeping on listening to their feedback and feeding that back into the programme has been a really important part of the work and the design.
That's really helpful. It's not really quite so much about numbers, it's about how the actual T-level fits within the requirement. That's really, really helpful. I slightly sort of preempted my next question, which is student number predictions. And I mean, that is a big jump, is it not, to 2029, 66,100 students predicted compared to the 25,000 now. Are you? I mean, you said very absolutely positively in answer to my question before you were going to meet that. You're still absolutely positive you will meet that large number?
Yes.
Shall I add to that? So, I mean, what we've seen substantial growth year on year. So we're at 25,500 starts from this academic year. The previous academic year we were at 16,000. That's about a 60% jump. And so what we've done is we've done a lot of modelling and a lot of refinement of that model. And as the Permanent Secretary said, we're now tracking that model very closely. So we were 1% above where we thought we were going to be for this year. So we are continuing to track that, but we've refined that model quite substantially, having learnt from the first 4 years of T-levels. I mean, they're still a very new qualification in the land of qualifications, you know, 4 years old, 5 years old this year, compared to A-levels at 74 years old. So it's really important that we keep iterating our understanding. But that trajectory we are tracking very, very closely now.
So my college, Cirencester, is very keen on these. It's absolutely full to bursting with students. It can't really take anymore. So presumably, if you know, you're going to need to bring a number of other providers on board. And what are you doing to encourage more institutions to provide T-levels?
We now have over 300 institutions who provide T-levels. We deliberately grew that relatively slowly to start with, so for the first 3 years we restricted that to good and outstanding providers to make sure that we had a really solid basis for the start. We obviously also introduced the T-levels in phases, and our last new T-level starts this September, so we're still in the ramp-up phase. We've worked very closely with providers throughout the programme. We've provided support to them, both in terms of support for their staff, so we've provided CPD support, so training support for their staff. We've also provided support for equipment and for capital works, so for premises works, to allow them to have the space to expand, and also to really importantly to have the equipment they need, because the T-levels, because as Carmel was saying, they are designed with employers. They are often very cutting edge in terms of the equipment that will be needed. So we've provided additional support into the colleges. It's also now it's really good to see it's not just colleges, schools also are delivering more and more T-levels. And so in our trajectory, we would like that to continue to expand. So, but we continually work with providers. We take feedback from providers on what we can do that's helpful. One of the adjustments, for example, that we're making at the moment, that IFATE are making, is to reduce the amount of assessment in one of the digital T-levels. That's directly from the feedback from providers that level of assessment was very difficult to deliver, practically to deliver. And so we take that feedback and collectively we work through how we should adjust the T-levels. So that's how we want to support providers going forward. Really helpful. Thank you very much. Clive Betts, please.
Just to follow up on the initial question, if I could. Clearly, there's a belief that T-levels are very important to address skills gaps. How flexible are they to respond to changes in the likely school requirements? Just give one example. You probably couldn't have predicted a year ago that we suddenly decided to spend a lot more, to the extent we are, on defence. That, if the Secretary of State for Defence is right, and that he wants more of that money to be spent on defence manufacture in this country, how quickly can T-levels respond to an increased demand for engineering skills?
So I think they're responsive in two ways, and I might bring Carmel in to talk about one of them. So first is we have seen the ability to be flexible and responsive on kind of volume of people going through particular routes. And I'd pick out the announcement that was recently made on construction skills, where we've put more investment into supporting actually a range of pathways, but including T-levels through that construction announcement. And as you say, we expect the defence spending to come through particularly the engineering T-level routes. But again, actually some of that defence spending will come through digital routes, we think. So the nature of defence and defence spending is changing. And then the second way in which we keep them agile is, and Carmel mentioned this in her first answer, the work we do to keep refreshing the content and making sure that it's staying up to date with practices in industry, working with employers. And I don't know if you wanted to say a little bit about that.
Yes, certainly. So we do have an annual change process for the T-levels, so they can be updated every year. If there were a significant change along the lines you're talking about, so if defence changes, for example, the standards, so the apprenticeship standards underpin the T-levels, so it's the same standard. So we'd be updating standard and then updating the T-level. So it could probably be from 18 months from a standard being changed to moving into delivery. That includes both new content and preparing providers to teach as well. There may be something that requires a different teaching skill. So some changes can be brought in much more quickly, but if it was something significant, I would probably say about 18 months.
Right. I suppose that's just, it's a potential concern, is it not, that there's going to be money for defence, skills required to produce the necessary weapons and IT as well. I completely accept that point. But it's going to be after this Parliament before individuals with those skills are actually come out of the T-level system.
So I think as I say, it depends a bit what the change is. I mean, if it's effectively more volume going through existing pathways, then that happens relatively quickly. And we've seen colleges respond quite quickly to demand for greater numbers. I think the other thing that's important is the work placement element of the T-level, which gets young people into workplaces in the second year of the T-level to a very significant degree. And as Julia was saying, a lot of young people then go on to employment with the employers with whom they do the work placement. But I think, you're right that we have to look at a mixture of routes and activities, and if we want something that's going to impact the labour market really fast, we have to make sure we're looking at the whole skills landscape. So one of the reasons, for example, that we've been investing particularly through Maryland Combined Authorities in skills boot camps is that they are a 12-week very rapid programme which pulls people into the labour market really quickly. So again, you want a mixture of routes that allow really rapid entry to the labour market and those where but you can't train people to do everything in 12 weeks. There are some things that just take longer than that, and so you need the mixture of routes.
Okay, let's come back to that point in a minute, but just in terms of the spending on T-levels, you've kindly sent the committee a letter updating recent changes that you're making with regard to the funding arrangements. How confident are you now that you know what T-levels are going to cost in general and specifically about startups and the introduction arrangements?
So we set rates for T-levels which are based on size. We added 4 additional funding rates to the standard set of 16 to 19 rates because T-levels are a larger qualification than most of those that we offer to this group. They're much more comparable in size to the qualifications that are offered in successful vocational systems around the world. So, I mean, I'm really clear about the costs in the sense that we've set those rates, we know what they are, and they follow through. We also have offered, in the early years of the T-level programme, an additional uplift, which started at 10% this year. We've just announced yesterday that it'll be 5% this year. And that was to recognise that as you introduce new qualifications, you may need a bit more funding because your initial class sizes might be a bit smaller, so you don't get the economies of scale that you get as you grow them. And we're fading that out because we are starting to see T-levels get really established as a qualification. I mean, the costs are fundamentally a function of the rates we set and the volumes. So as we work on the kind of volume projections, and as I say, we're now tracking our latest projections much more closely, I'm pretty confident that we'll land in that.
If I might, there's 2 other elements that we also fund. So we also fund providers, we give them an amount which is £550 per student for establishing the industry placements. And we've worked on that, understanding those costs with providers. We also, one of the things that we announced yesterday was actually an employer support fund. So that's targeted at small and medium-sized companies and health. But that's an amount for those companies to help them with the additional costs, and particularly for small companies to support them to be able to take T-level students, which is a really important element. So we've got a really clear picture of the funding and the costs and how those two match together. And as the Permanent Secretary says, we're clear that that's in the right place for this stage of development of the programme.
So you're clear how much you're going to spend this financial year on T-levels? Yeah, so you're certain about the numbers of students?
Yes, I mean, it is a demand-led programme, so it might vary a bit, but yes.
Yeah. And what's the impact of the extra funding arrangements that you announced a couple of days ago?
So the 5%, so that's basically what we've announced, is that on top of, as the Permanent Secretary says, we have a funding rate that we apply for T-levels. They depend on the size of the T-level, and all T-levels are larger than the average Level 3 programme, so they have an additional amount, which is really to cover the extra hours of teaching, but they vary. There's 4 rates. It depends on which size of T-level it is. They go in. On top of that, we also have applied this additional, what was the 5% additional on top of that. As the Permanent Secretary said, that was 10% to recognise the newness of the programme. As we're now entering into Year 5, we've purposefully reduced that to 5% because they're becoming more steady state. But we still know that we do have institutions who are coming on stream for the first time, or institutions who are taking on the new T-levels for the first time. So we wanted to give an additional amount to really support those who are coming new into the programme, but we thought it was right to reduce that from the 10% to the 5%. But we are also keeping that additional money for the industry placements that are set out. So all of those elements are public, and providers are aware of those.
Julia, I suppose the answer of this committee, we're very keen on numbers. Having reduced it for some, but kept the money back for the new entrants, if you like, what's the sort of total net extra contribution that you're giving?
So it will depend on the numbers that we expect to come through in September. So it will be because it's utterly linked to the number of students. So that additional will obviously be half the additional from last time if it was the same number of students, but it will utterly depend on the number of students.
Yeah, but you're certain about the number of students. You just told us you were pretty confident. You know what the number of students are.
Yes.
So you can do an assessment about the total cost then. Pretty.
So we could do, yes, but we don't do that assessment to prejudge the number of students. So we will have calculated that ourselves, but we don't put that into the budget, so to speak, because we want to have the flexibility, because if actually we get higher numbers, that would be something that would be really positive, and we want to make sure that we've got the flexibility in the budget to fund those. So we wouldn't be constrained, we wouldn't be constrained by that number. We would absolutely keep that figure at 5% for however many students come through, and if that number is higher, that would be a real positive to our mind. I mean, to your point about defence and indeed construction, I mean, construction is a really good example of the point you're making on defence, that we saw in construction that there was a need to really significantly scale up the skills to meet the demands across the economy. And so that's why the construction package was put in, which has an element for T-levels, an element for industry placement. It also has an element which goes into FE colleges through their high course value premium to react really quickly and to enable that scale up.
We got the point you were making about there are other ways to deliver skills. How do you know, therefore, that T-levels are a cost-effective way when clearly they appear to be more expensive than other qualifications?
Yes, I mean, we have some incredibly clear evidence on that, and I'll start with a very simple one. So we see really good outcomes for T-level learners in terms of their progression into work and further study. So not just in general that 90% of those who finish their T-levels progress into work or further study, but that about 7 in 10, a bit more than 7 in 10, go into closely related fields to the specialism of their T-level. And that is a very good rate. You might be asking, what about the other 30%? But the the figures are not perfectly comparable, but the typical figure for a classroom-based level 3 course is closer to 30% going into a related area of work of those who go into work from a level 3 course. It's always tended to be higher for apprenticeships because they're closer to the workplace and they're more linked to that kind of eventual employment. So if you think about the investment in skills and whether those skills are then coming through into young people being employed in the sector in which you've skilled them for, we can see T-levels really showing significant success compared to other classroom-based level 3 qualifications. The other thing we see that is really encouraging is that where T-level students go on to study apprenticeships, again, over 7 in 10 of those who go into apprenticeships go into a higher or degree level apprenticeship as the follow-on from their T-level. When we look at other level 3 classroom-based qualifications from which people progress into apprenticeships, actually about half of them end up doing an apprenticeship that's at level 3 again. In other words, they're repeating a level 3 qualification because the qualification hasn't got them far enough to go into a higher or a degree level apprenticeship. So it's about 24% of most level 3 learners will go into a higher or degree apprenticeship. Over 50% end up doing one at level 3, and actually that 24% of them end up doing an apprenticeship at level 2, so they'll go down a level. Whereas with T-levels, they're preparing young people to go into the higher and degree level apprenticeships because they're giving them that really solid grounding. We're still slightly early in the life of T-levels to have the really copper-bottomed evidence of longer lifetime earnings impact, simply because the first people to take T-levels only took them in 2020. But those signals of the proportion of people who are going into work and study are going into particularly related areas to the T-level and who are going on to higher level study from the T-level rather than marking time and repeating are really good signals of quality and value, and those are some of the things we've been looking at.
The comments that have been made about T-levels having a 25% more valuable than comparable qualifications are still a guesstimate at this stage, I think.
There are best assessment at this stage, and we have, and I would say those lead indicators that I described to you on the progression routes for learners out of the T-level support that assessment. So again, we do know, for example, how much more valuable it is to have done a higher level apprenticeship than to have done one at level 3, and so you can infer that back in. It's just that those learners haven't actually made it out into the workplace for long enough for us to have done that directly for those young people yet.
Do you have any information as to how many of those that have taken a T-level go on to another qualification, a higher qualification, either going to university or doing a higher level qualification?
We do. So 44% of those who've completed have gone on to a university degree, compared to 49% who have gone on to work, which is often an apprenticeship but could be straight in directly into work. So it's a relatively even split, and that's actually, I think, one of the benefits of the T-level programme, that it gives those students, they've got the option of either. They've got the option that if they want to take the route through into work and into their occupation, as the Permanent Secretary said, we've got some really strong success measures. But if they want to go into university, we've also seen really strong success measures in terms of the offers that those students are getting are on a par with, in terms of the proportion of them who are getting offers, are on a par with other level 3 programmes. So they've got both choices, and we think that's a positive and something that gives students choice.
Steph, thank you very much.
In terms of employers' feedback, apparently you've had some that's positive, but maybe the data isn't as robust as you would want it to be. So what more are you doing to try and get a feedback from employers that you'd be more happy to rely on?
So we do an awful lot with employers to get the feedback, both generally and very specifically. And Carmel, I'm sure, will want to add on the sort of the more specific detail into the programme. But we work very closely. We have a set of T-level ambassadors. We have 900 T-level ambassadors. They're a mix of T-level students, but they're also employers. They work really closely with us in terms of giving us feedback about the programme and how it works, but also talking to other employers. We often find that, as I said before, that once employers start taking T-level students, they really do scale up because they see the great advantage For example, I'm sure the MACE chair wouldn't mind me saying that I was talking to him recently, who said that he was a sceptic to start with. He took T-level students, and now he's absolutely wants to keep scaling them up. Those T-level students are becoming his apprentices. And so it's actually much more powerful for him to talk to other employers than for me often, so because he can explain how it's really worked in the business. So those though we work with those employers, they work within our programme to really spread that sort of information to other employers. I don't know, Carmel, if you wanted to add about specifics.
Yes, and IFH work with what we call root panels. So we have a group of employers for every sector. They scrutinise the materials, they scrutinise the changes, and indeed provide really valuable feedback if they want changes made. And that's sort of triangulated with employer information coming through the awarding organisations, and indeed employers that are providing placements to providers. So we get different employer voices coming through at different stages, and that has led to some really valuable feedback if we need to make a change quite quickly to the T-level.
That's a helpful comment. I was going on to my final question then. In terms of assessing where you've got to now, in what is a very new programme still, are you still looking to see whether there could be refinements to make them more flexible in terms of response to changing circumstances, and even make them more cost effective to deliver desired outcomes at slightly less cost? Are they issues that are ongoing?
Yes, we are doing that, and we've made a number of changes, both in response to providers, in terms of delivery of assessment, in terms of changes to content. So that's the flexibility that we have built in, and we continue to refine the T-levels. We do that annually. We do that at every change of procurement as well. We're just going into the second phase of procurement for each T-level. We have reduced some of the burden of assessment. So, for example, reducing the number of core examinations from 2 to 1 in a couple of T-levels, reducing, I think we mentioned earlier, a particular project in digital, which is quite a substantial project, so reducing the hours. So they are very agile, and a lot of the changes originate with employer feedback.
Anna Dixon, please.
Thank you, and good morning. My constituency has Shipley College, which is offering T-levels. One of the challenges that they've raised with me is that obviously part of the reason for having T-levels in these sectors is their sector shortages, but that also makes it extremely difficult to hire the tutors. So I really wanted to probe on two elements of just following up what's been discussed. One is the funding rate. So are you looking at whether the funding rate for the providers is adequate, particularly on things like digital, for them to actually afford to hire the tutors? And the second is, as part of your employer engagement, is there any room to help solve this tutor shortage of actually looking to ways to incentivise either secondments or other ways in which employers can support colleges with meeting those tutor shortages, as I say, particularly in areas like digital and IT, where we know salary costs in the sector are obviously not at all comparable to the costs that colleges are able to pay their staff.
So yes, I mean, on the second, I completely recognise that, and as you say, often in an area where there's a skill shortage, you'll see salaries rise. It's the basics of economics. So we do work quite closely on this. We've been doing, in terms of the idea of could we do more with industry actually putting tutors into colleges. We've been doing some work on that. Various colleges actually have been leading the way in that. Liverpool College, for example, have been doing have their own teacher exchange programme. We've been doing some work with Gatsby as well, the Gatsby Foundation, who've been running a pilot around this. And it's one of the areas we definitely do want to try and encourage. Indeed, one of the elements of the construction package that we recently announced is an industry exchange piece of that programme for exactly that reason. And it's very beneficial where it's worked well in colleges. It's been beneficial not only in terms of introducing specific staff members into the college, but also those staff members, because they're in industry at the same time, they're bringing the latest expertise, and then they're able to share that expertise with the other members of staff in the college. So it's had a sort of double benefit, if you like. So we're really keen to try and encourage that. We're very happy to work with colleges if they want to set something up that's similar or would like to engage with us. So very happy for your college get in touch if that's helpful.
What about the funding rate, though? I mean, the industry exchange sounds a good initiative, but if the basic funding rate isn't there to cover the cost of the tutors?
So in the funding rate, as we said, we have recognised that T-levels have a greater teaching burden on colleges and schools. That's why we've actually not just gone with the base funding rate. We've gone with higher funding rates. So we've got 4 different higher funding rates. They're in line with the hours. So we've uplifted it to be in line with the hours. So we have thought about that. We have tried to recognise that in the additional funding rates that we've put in for the T-levels. We also, and then as I said, we have continued with this additional further uplift. So you've got the uplift for the hours, and then you've got this further uplift of the 5% on top of that to also recognise the additional burden. So we have been very conscious of that and have been putting in additional funding into the sector. The money we put in for industry placements is there for providers, because we recognise that there's also a burden on providers to find those industry placements, to make sure they're really positive placements for the students, to work with their employers. That takes time, which takes staff time, which takes money, which is why we've put the additional element in for those as well.
Just to clarify, sorry, Chair, the funding rate is based on the number of hours. There's no differential in funding rates based on the cost of attracting tutors, for example, between IT and digital and, say, catering, although I understand that one's not going ahead, but you take my point. There are very different labour market costs out there.
There's a base funding rate which is based on hours, and the 4 T-level funding rates range from £10,980 per student, and that's over 2 years for the smallest one, to £15,188 per student over 2 years for the largest one, which is a generous funding rate. So the standard funding rate for 16 to 19 is £10,052 over 2 years. So they're significantly higher than the rates for other qualifications. That's based on the fact that there's more teaching hours. On top of that, as well as the 5% uplift, we also offer high value course premia, which recognise both shortage areas and areas where it's harder to recruit. And then there are some things we've done that are specifically to support colleges with teacher recruitment and retention. They're not T-level specific, because what we tend to see is, exactly as you're saying, that the shortage is driven a bit more by the subject area than by the qualification type, if that makes sense. And the 2 things I'd highlight there are that we introduced a targeted retention incentive that offers eligible early career teachers in STEM and priority technical subjects £6,000 after tax annually. So that's over 5 years, so it's £30,000 in total. That's in addition to their salary. And we've something similar was initially introduced in schools. We extended it and levelled it up to cover colleges as well. In schools, you have to be teaching in a school that's in a deprived area to attract the highest level of the premium. In FE, we've said every FE college should attract the highest level of the premium, and we've extended it to cover shortage technical subjects. There are also bursaries to support people through training in shortage subjects, so £31,000 tax-free of bursaries for those training in STEM subjects. And again, the E of STEM covers technical, the technical end of the STEM category, not just the academic end, and that's been very important as well.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be essential to deliver on these T-level numbers to get that recruitment and retention and level the playing field between colleges and schools, which is obviously another issue. But thank you for your responses. I'm done.
Thank you very much. Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions, if I may. I'm not quite sure who to direct this to, but I think there was mention before, Miss Kinniburgh, thank you.
Sorry.
People that have completed, I was the first to attempt, but it's 49% of young people that have completed these T-levels have ended up in work. Are you doing a piece of work to take in some of that long-term evidence around what they earn, whether they stay in work after 12 months, how much of a success it will be in the long run? Because, it sounds like you're nodding away. I think that's a really good thing. And have you had any feedback from those young people about how they find that workspace? And have you had any feedback from employers around some of the changes to the the Make Work Pay sort of government agenda for pay levels for young people being increased, and how's that affected the sort of take-up?
Let's start.
Yeah, why don't you start?
And forgive me if I miss any elements of your question. Do come back. But so yes, we do absolutely. We're tracking as much as we can at the moment. As the Permanent Secretary says, the first cohort finished their T level in 2022. So those people have only been in the workplace 2 years. We have the ability through something called the Longitudinal Educational Outcome Study to match education data to HMRC data. We will use that capability over time to really understand how long do they remain in those different sectors, what's their progression, what does it look like in terms of earning outcomes. As the Chair said, we have made an estimate of that, but that's our best estimate based on the evidence we have. We will be checking that estimate against the actuality as these students go further through in their careers. But as the Permanent Secretary said, we're very pleased to see the outcomes that we're seeing in terms of the proportions who are progressing and who are progressing to those higher level apprenticeship outcomes. In terms of the feedback that we've had really positive feedback from students. So I speak to a lot of T-level students. If you ask a T-level student why did they choose the T-level, the most frequent answer is because of the industry placement. That's the defining feature, that's what they wanted. And then when you talk to those T-level students who've been in the industry placement, often their ambition is to achieve an apprenticeship at degree level in the industry which they've done their industry placement on. We're seeing that it's around 75% of them who are successful in that, so that's great. And then when you speak to them, and there's only a few of them obviously who've managed to make this jump, but we've seen individuals who've done the T-level, done the industry placement, been taken on as an apprentice. They're really pleased to have made that leap, and they're often at that point they're sort of 19 years old. They're working in the industry that they want to work in. They've got a specialism, and they can see a really clear career path. So they've seen it as a real positive, and that's I think why we have our ambassador program has grown and grown. Partly because so many people want to spread the word. Because I met a T-level student in the college the other day. I said, "How come you're doing a T-level?" He said, "Because my cousin did a T-level, and he told me how brilliant it was." So we do a lot of promoting of T-levels, but you'll probably listen to your cousin more than you'll listen to sort of the government promotion. So it's great that they're out there spreading that. We also though do take. I'll always ask the T-level students, "What's your feedback? Tell me what you would want to change if you could change anything in the T-level program." And some of that feedback is not only from employers that we had feedback about sort of the level of assessment, we had some of that from the students, and so we do take all of that seriously and we bring that back in.
Lovely. If I just very briefly follow up on that, I suppose you've answered a little bit of it anyway, but it was, I represent a constituency in East Lancashire, big manufacturing base, historic manufacturing base, great colleges, very proud of it. There are a few big employers who've spoken to me since the election that talk about their skill shortages, and none of them have mentioned T-levels. I have admittedly not mentioned T-levels, but I feel like I should have probably known more about it. They should have known more about it. People should be talking more about it. I accept it's a sort of word of mouth thing. But what more can you do to attract some of these employers? Because actually, some of the problems that they're talking about could be addressed by T-levels with a bit more closer partnership.
Yeah. And we are seeing the awareness go up. It's now about a third of employers when we look across the piece, and that's risen quite substantially over the last few years. But we need to do much more. So we do a lot of work promoting T-levels generally, but also promoting them with employer groups. I talk to business groups an awful lot about T-levels and about how they fit in, and really enabling people to see them as this part of this pathway into apprenticeship. I think that's what's really helpful for people to understand, that it's not just sort of a separate program. It's part of a pathway through. And for you as an employer, it gives you the opportunity really. I mean, in a way, you've got a great opportunity to pick the talent of the future, because they're in your institution for 9 weeks. They're working there. You can see who's going to thrive, and you can pick the talent of the future. But we completely accept your point. We want to keep promoting this. We have an awards event each year, which various businesses sponsor for us, and we have introduced. It used to be just the Apprenticeship Awards. It's now the Apprenticeship and T-Level Awards. We have our T-Level Student of the Year. We have our T-Level Employer of the Year. So we're really trying to really make sure more and more people are talking about it. So please do talk to your employers about it.
And I suppose if Oliver having done that, they would like to talk to you, you'd be more than happy to do so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Permanent Secretary, I know this is not, the primary purpose of all this is to give our youngsters the very best technical training they can get. And that's what we're all about. So I'm sorry to ask questions about money, but this committee is about money. You've spent 1.25 billion on this project so far. The NAO in paragraph 13 estimate that the information available at the moment, for an average T-level student, they gain an extra 23,000 over their lifetime. So how do you assess in terms of economics that these T-levels compare with the alternatives, so either a degree or a level 3 apprenticeship?
So we estimate that T-levels are about 25% more valuable than other typical classroom-based level 3 qualifications. And that's about halfway between the value of level 3 classroom qualifications and level 3 apprenticeships. So we still see apprenticeships as a very valuable qualification, and the outcomes from apprenticeships are strong. So as I say, that your likelihood of ending up working in a linked field if you go through an apprenticeship is high, not very surprisingly, because an apprenticeship is a job. But we know that ability to offer apprenticeships, because an apprenticeship is a job, is constrained by the number of people who are able to offer them. And so the T-level is trying to increase the value of something that is classroom-based but has a much stronger kind of work-related element and has significantly more hours than our typical level 3 vocational qualifications associated with it. As I say, this is quite linked to the questions that have been being asked just now on how we assess the value as we start to see those learners go through into the workplace. But at the moment, the kind of positive signs are 90% of T-level learners are in work or further study, 7 out of 10 of them are in a field linked to the T-level, which is a really good rate compared to classroom-based level 3. Of those who go on to do an apprenticeship, the vast majority are doing an apprenticeship at the next level up, as opposed to those other level 3 qualifications which tend to lead people into repeating a level 3 apprenticeship, which clearly isn't as good value for money as seeing people progress. And then, just to add to the point about student feedback and satisfaction, 7 out of 10 T-level students say they think their T-level prepared them very well for the workplace. That's about 10 to 15 percentage points higher than most comparable level 3 qualifications, including other technical vocational qualifications. For interest, the proportion of students who say they think that A-levels prepared them well for the workplace is about 34%. Which is fine, because that's not what A-levels are for. But again, we see students reporting to us that this is a qualification that is preparing them well for work, and all of the indicators we've got say that too. And we'll keep that assessment under review as we see more of the students go through into work.
Really what I was trying to draw out from my question, that you will continue to review this and gain data from as more students go through the system. And of course that's only an average figure. It takes Anna's point, some are less, get less well-paid jobs at the end of that T-level. Inevitably a hairdresser doesn't get paid as well as a digital person. So that's an average, isn't it? That £34,000. But you'll keep sort of asking them the questionnaires and reviewing that figure. Yes. That's really helpful. Just moving on. You, as the accounting officer in 24, had to issue a qualification in terms of feasibility of delivery. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yes, it wasn't actually me. It was my predecessor, who was the accounting officer, who asked for the direction, and it was he asked for a direction because he was concerned about the extremely ambitious pace that had been set for the introduction of T-levels. So he asked for the direction really specifically about the pace of introduction, and the Secretary of State at the time looked at that and chose to give the direction, and the department then did what the department should do when it's given a direction by a minister, which is it worked really, really hard to make it happen. And we did introduce on the timetable. I think the fact that we introduced 16 of the T-levels on the original timetable, but we had 5 where there was some delay, might say to you that, identifying that this was a very ambitious timetable for rollout was a reasonable thing to do. But what we've been trying to do as the department is to make sure that we plan for what ministers have asked us to do and deliver it to the very best of our ability.
We may be talking apples and pears here. Maybe, I don't know, and let me just try and clarify this. I accept that your predecessor asked for an exception initially, but then, according to my note, in April 24, the accounting officer, that's presumably you, updated the programme of accounting officer assessment, noting feasibility risks associated with the introduction of new qualifications and overlapping level 3 qualifications.
I'm so sorry, Chair, you're quite right. I apologise. I asked a question you hadn't asked. Yes, so in 2024, you will remember that we were looking at both the programme for defunding of other qualifications, and in the light of that I was noting that was going to have an impact on the original trajectory for the numbers, which again we've seen play out in the reassessments of the numbers, and that was what I was identifying in that accounting officer assessment.
So just as a follow-up, I mean, you're obviously you're following up this feasibility aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Is it going in the right direction? It's really, I suppose, what I'm really trying to get at.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Anna Dixon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we've talked a little bit about the take-up of T-levels. I want to particularly look at this from the students' perspective. Obviously, there'll be a number of factors in students' choices around whether T-levels is the right thing for them. The NAO report itself sets out some issues about awareness, the appeal of T-levels, obviously whether they have the entry requirements in terms of prior attainment. What are you doing, and please, if you feel you've already covered this, don't necessarily repeat, but what is your assessment of what the challenges are to getting more student numbers, more demand? So I'm looking at the demand side, and what are you doing to address those?
So, and I might bring Julia in to build on what I'll start by saying. So we've, as you have to do when you introduce any new qualification, we've invested quite heavily in national communications campaigns to raise awareness. They've existed since 2019 and they've evolved over time. They incorporate advertising, PR, but also partnership activity, including with routes such as Snapchat, and they're quite heavily targeted on young people. So my daughter, who is in the right age cohort, sees a lot more of these adverts than I do. And we also have been working hard to raise awareness with schools, with our careers partnerships, and we've been working through key moments. So, for example, T-level results day alongside A-level results day, you will always see the department communicating heavily around T-levels and the results for learners, and that's part of the communications work that we do. T-levels week, T-level Thursday, which is part of Apprenticeships week, and we gave T-level providers careers guidance grants of up to £10,000 in 23-24 to support innovative careers activity to promote T-levels to prospective students. Julia's already mentioned the T-level Ambassadors Network, which has got more than 900 members now, and we're looking at creating some regional networks as part of the network as it grows, and we see those ambassadors being incredibly powerful in talking to their colleagues about T-levels. Parents, peers and providers are also really important. So students will often take advice from their college. They will quite often come saying they want to study in a particular area, but take advice from the college about the qualification within that. So that's also an incredibly important part of the route. So the supply and demand get intertwined a bit in that. And again, the growth over time we still see this kind of strong growth year on year in people coming through into T-levels, and that compounds. So it means you've got more people who've done one who can talk about it to their peers. So you can see a compounding effect.
Just probing on that peer point, though, Shipley College has sort of pointed out that one of the challenges is that it's a lot more demanding.
Yes.
It's many more hours, both of study and in placement, and obviously, for some students, perhaps in terms of affordability, they might need to be working part-time to just earn some money. They have other interests in life outside of studying. Do you think there's a risk that I suppose almost the lack of equivalence, and this is a concern for me, that if you're a student choosing between other level 3 qualifications and a T-level, and you hear from peers just how demanding it is, this might well be somewhat off-putting if you could say, well, actually, if I did A-levels, I can still do that casual job and going out and have some fun. So is there real equivalence here, or are we putting students off by demanding too much of them?
T-levels are demanding, and they do ask for more hours of students' time than quite a few other level 3 qualifications. But what we hear from students, and certainly what I hear from students when I talk to them, is that they understand that the value that they're getting from that is worth it, and that both the outcomes are stronger, but also that, the one thing I'd say about the hours is, if you look at the list of hours requirements for other countries around the world that have strong vocational and technical programs, actually our T-levels still looks at the lower end of most of those. So T-levels is about 1,300 to 1,600 hours over 2 years, which is between 660 and 840 hours a year. That compares to 640 hours for average level 3. So they're bigger, but they're not crazy bigger. But in Canada, the median's 935 hours a year. In Denmark, it's 1,000 hours a year. In Finland, it's 700. In France, between 780 and 900. In Italy, between 890 and 1,155. So they're still slender compared to international.
I wouldn't want to suggest that our UK students are work shy in any way. I want to be put off by that. They're
sure you
extremely studious, and the ones that I met at Shipley College who were doing their healthcare, doing an amazing placement at the local Bradford Royal Infirmary Hospital, there was no doubt, one, they were very committed, two, it was going to turn them out as really employable young people, and they were very committed to their studies. But it does raise the point about whether, for example, some of the assessments could be shorter, could there be options for some of the sort of more practical live assessment. So, just making them more attractive, I guess, to students. The other concern, there's two other concerns that I'll put, and then yourself, Ms. Acland-Hood, or others could answer. From a student's perspective, is the over-specialisation. So when I look in the NAA report, there's about 4 different types of engineering and manufacturing. And I know within healthcare, you've sort of dropped the midwifery. Would it not be better to allow students sort of to choose a broader subject rather than this over-specialising in terms of a pathway? 16, I think a lot of people argue is too young perhaps to be making such choices. And the other aspect of this is the sort of all or nothing. If you're doing 3 A-levels, if you miss out on one, at least you've got the other 2 on your CV. With the T-level, even if you fail, if you pass all of your assessments, but you just miss out on a few hours of placement, you have nothing to show for all of that work. So is there any way as well that you could look to adapt to allow students to get more credit for what they have completed, so that there's less of a sort of all or nothing? And do you see these as factors that may put students off, and are you sorting them out?
Thank you. Yes, and again, I might bring Carmel in. The point about keeping on taking the feedback and thinking about things like the assessment burden is absolutely part of what we're doing, and indeed we've got good examples of where, as we've gone through the second generation, we've looked at opportunities to slim or rationalise. And always trying to do that in a way that retains the kind of the quality, the progression and the outcomes for students. But of course we can do that, and we should keep learning and iterating and doing that as we go through. I think on the point about specialisation, so typically T-level students will do more of that specialisation as they go into the second year. So they don't necessarily have to have narrowed down on the specialism from the first minute they start the T-level, and the core is broader than the occupational specialism, and typically students will do more work on the core in the first year and then work on the occupational specialism in the second year, although colleges have a bit of flexibility about that. There is definitely something about a T-level pathway is suitable for a young person who at 16 does, broadly speaking, know what occupational area they want to go into, and that won't be true for every 16-year-old, and that is why it is important that we are retaining smaller qualifications that can be kind of put together in combinations that might give you a kind of broader pathway. But I meet lots of 16-year-olds. Some of them don't quite know what they want to do. Actually, some of them really do, and want to get started and to do it really well. And so there's something about kind of designing a qualifications landscape that has roots for people who do have that clarity, but also has some space for people who are still testing or exploring what they're doing. And then on the all or nothing nature, again, there's something about if you do know what you want to do and you want to really get skilled in your occupational specialism, that doing of one large qualification does slightly have that feature. But we have looked at how we can certificate the things that people have done. Right. The example you gave, which was on the work placement, if you haven't quite finished your work placement by the end of the T-level, and last year 97.5% of T-level students had finished their work placement, but you have 2 years in which you can complete the work placement and still get the T-level. So we've got some space for people to finish that off and still get the T-level. And we've also got a mechanism for certificating all of the elements you have done. So even if you, for example, do the core and then don't quite get on with the occupational specialism, we have got a way of certificating.
We have got a way of allocating
UCAS points for it as well.
This is the key point. You talked about half of them wanting to perhaps pursue a university entry. Obviously, if there were a delay on completion, that's going to affect people's ability to take up places at university. So has that problem largely been solved by giving UCAS points?
So we do give the UCAS points. You do have to complete the industry placement for that, but we do give UCAS points if you haven't completed both the core and the occupational specialism, which is to recognise exactly your point about the all or nothing, because if you take 3 A-levels, you could pass 2 and fail 1 and still potentially progress. So that's why we've made that UCAS point. But then on the industry placement, as the Permanent Secretary says, we've given this flexibility of an additional 2 years, because those who are not completing, it's often for personal circumstances, so we wanted to give that flexibility so that they have the opportunity to complete. So that's how we've built that flexibility.
And so are you confident then that by both making it more attractive and doing your public awareness campaigns that you're going to close the gap? I think we're talking about at the moment half of prospective pupils are still unaware of T-levels. I mean, where do you expect that to be in another year's time?
So we've seen, we still do have a gap to close, as you say. We've actually seen over 2 years, we saw a around 30 percentage point jump in awareness. So that's really good. It's now around, I think it's about 86% of teachers in Key Stage 4 and 5 who now are aware of the T-levels. They're school teachers. We haven't spoken particularly about that. That's really important, because they'll be the people talking to the 15-year-olds about their choices and making sure that they've got those choices. We obviously want those figures to grow. We'd love everybody to know about T-levels, so we're not taking our foot off the pedal on the public awareness. We've got our various campaigns, they're still running. We are using we're growing our ambassador network, we're using that more and more, but we recognise the point, and absolutely we want more and more people to hear about them. What we are seeing though is those, as I say, those numbers are jumping pretty substantially in terms of awareness year on year, which, as the Permanent Secretary said, is partly because the more people who take them, they can then go out into the workplace, the more employers who sign up. That's been a real positive. Yeah. But we're not complacent about that.
But this sort of stop-start approach where, I think it's to some extent lack of interest. Certain T-levels have either never sort of made it to delivery, have sort of been withdrawn even before getting going, and then you've got these other ones, the healthcare science, the on-site construction. So students have enrolled, but they've then subsequently been closed to further entry. It doesn't give students a lot of confidence when applying for T-levels that there is this sort of chopping and changing. So, can you say a little bit more about how you can offer a bit more certainty about the subjects that are going to be available, and that the viability of the different specialisms? And I'll look. Yes, Julia.
Shall I start,
yes.
and then Carmel might want to come in? I mean,
yes.
in terms of the two that have been withdrawn, so the healthcare and then specialism and the on-site construction, they've not been withdrawn because they're not valuable qualifications for those individuals. So those individuals who are going through those and have gone through those, that's still really valuable for them. It was more, as we talked about before, we're really keen to iterate the programme and hear from employers, and employers were saying actually there are different routes through. In the healthcare one, actually, to your point about over-specialisation, we have two other routes in that, two other pathways in that route, and what we thought we could do more easily was to drop those elements into those other routes, or where there are specific areas that need to be covered, often they're better covered by apprenticeships. But we've done all of that in discussion with providers and in discussion with employers, but there's no suggestion that any student who's taken those, they're not valuable qualifications. They really are. It's about, is this the best pathway for those individuals? And then in terms of the ones that haven't come through, so catering, for example, or hair and beauty, those were ones where we had, when we started the programme, we had intended to introduce those. As we got closer to introduction and we're doing the detailed work about the content and having those detailed conversations with the panels, that's where we talk very closely with employers about, are these the right routes through? Is this what you would like? Or are there alternative routes? I don't know, Carmel, if you wanted to pick up on that point.
Yeah, so we often keep all T-levels under review for various factors, various criteria, and that includes the demand, but also the feedback that we talked about earlier from providers, from employers on how T-levels are working. And in those particular cases of catering and hair and beauty, we didn't take those decisions lightly. We looked at the evidence that was available and found there is alternative provision that probably works better. So in terms of catering and hospitality, particularly in the apprenticeship space, there are alternative level 2, level 3 apprenticeships, and in hair and beauty as well. We actually took that decision as a split decision. We decided to stop the hair side of it, and then we looked whether we could create a beauty T-level, but again in consultation with employers and providers, and looking at what the wider offer was, we decided that the offer would be better in the apprenticeship space, or indeed in alternative level 2, level 3 qualifications.
It sounds like you do a lot of engagement on the employer side, and these decisions are being very driven by the employers. I just wonder about where you're doing the student engagement, looking at where the demand is for different subjects and what choices students would like to have available to them. It seems that that's, from what I've heard, a bit lacking.
Yes, we have both IFATE and the department have had student panels specifically for T-levels, right. So we take evidence through that. They are quite early on in the process, the students, so they've already started their T-level, but we have taken evidence from students that's resulted in some of the changes to the titling of T-levels that haven't been very clear, and we've taken feedback on content, and feedback from the providers, so the colleges and schools as well have provided feedback on behalf of the students as well. So there's quite a round of feedback evaluating that and continuing to do that on an annual basis in terms of any changes or decisions that we need to make.
Okay, I think that's my section for now, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you. Can I return to the question which I sort of started with at the beginning of this, is employer placements?
Yes.
In August 23, your department estimated that constraints imposed by shortages of teachers and industry placements could limit the places to around 48,000. Of course, this is compared to an aspiration of over 66,000 by the 2029. Have you reassessed that limit or ceiling, if you like, imposed either by number of teachers or by employer placement?
Yes, so that was an assessment that was made, assuming we didn't make any changes to the structures and systems around that. And we've since made some quite significant changes to particularly the flexibilities on industry placements. Again, listening really hard to what employers told us about what would make it easier for them to deliver those placements. And so our assessment now would be that we don't think industry placements will be a constraint on getting us to the targeted figure. Do you want me to run through what the changes are that we made?
Yes, it would be really helpful.
So
please.
The main change was this January, and we fundamentally it was about trying to make sure that our approach to placement keeps pace with what the modern world of work is like. So we had been very clear that we didn't want any part of a student's placement to be hybrid or remote, and there were quite a lot of employers who have significant hybrid working arrangements for all of their staff who found it very difficult to integrate a student who couldn't do any of their work remotely. And so we now allow up to 20% of remote or hybrid hours for all T-levels, and more than that in the digital T-levels, because in digital employers it's particularly prevalent as a normal way of working for their staff. We don't want to go beyond that, so we still think it's very important that there's a strong face-to-face element in the work placement, because we think that's important for the young person's learning and engagement. But we've seen early analysis from polling we've done of employers that suggest that those flexibilities could create something close to a 55% increase in the number of placements offered, because that really was proving a constraint for employers based on ways of working. The second shift we made was around allowing some elements of some placements to be done in simulated environments, and that's particularly important where you've got quite high risk levels in taking a 16-year-old into your business and setting them off on something in the real world first off. Again, we don't want anybody's placement to be wholly simulated. We don't think that's right. It's got to be real work in the workplace. But again, allowing them to do some simulated work environment before they go into the real work environment has unlocked some employers who were worried about just the risk profile of bringing young people in straight off.
So your answers stimulated a further question for me, which I was going to ask you in my sort of mop-up towards the end. But my Cirencester College make the point that there is in Cirencester a very successful games designing company, and they get the placements involved in some of those aspects, and games are a very interesting industry because it involves mathematics, it involves art, it involves marketing, and maths particularly. So they make the point that when they get the T-level placements involved, sometimes they're involved in, say, manufacturing a game for California. Naturally, in that industry, a lot of that is done remote. And they say if the placee, if that's the right word, is racking up against the 50%, that is a constraint. And I wonder if there is a little bit of flexibility that could be offered there.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things we'll keep under review. As I say, at the moment we've said 50% remote for digital, recognising that there's a lot more hybrid and remote working in digital sectors than there are in others. We have been reluctant to go to something that
they're just on a one-off, slight flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something we can look at.
Yeah, would be really helpful. What assessment have you done on this whole business of what to determine the maximum number of placements employers can offer and providers can support? And I note that you used to provide a £25,000 incentive for placements. You've now abolished that. Given that this is, well, according to science, there's still a problem finding the number of placements. I imagine that they're probably at the upper end of the number of students they offer T-levels. Is there more that you could do to help them? Because
so we provide £550 per student to the provider to help them arrange the placement, and in some cases they will pass some of that on to the employer. And again, we give them some discretion because we know that the cost base and the challenge for employers is different across different sectors. The other thing that we announced yesterday was the Employer Support Fund, which is a targeted fund for the academic year 25-26, and that is focused on SMEs, because we know that the costs and the barriers to SMEs starting to employ T-level students can be particularly high, and we think that will also support some of the challenge we know. So again, it can be easier to find work placements in some areas than others, and unlocking SME participation will help us with some of that, those kind of geographic differentials as well. And then we've also got an element of that that's particularly focused on health, because there are some really specific upfront costs on health. So students need vaccinating, they need DBS checking, they need uniforms, they need PPE when they go into health placement. So there's some very specific costs there that the Employer Support Fund will help with. And then I do think it's worth coming back to this point that Julia made earlier, which is there's also something about just getting more employers to dip their toe in the water and take their first 1 or 2 T-level students, because some of it is not about cost, some of it is about unfamiliarity, about, again, sometimes people have, I think, overly heightened levels of anxiety about having 16-year-olds in their workplace, and you overcome that when you try it. And I mean, as Julia said, I mean, Amazon took 6 industry placements 3 years ago, and now they take 100. And we expect to see that, more importantly, they expect to see that grow further. We've seen similar kind of really rapid growth trajectories in lots of the other employers we work with, and typically people don't start and then pull out, they start and then they grow. And so getting people to take their first T-level student to try it for the first time is a really important part of the strategy.
In a rural area like mine, well, it's partly rural, there must be all the difference in the world between persuading an Amazon this world to take people, even 100 of them, to a little employer in my constituency who only employs 10 or 15 people now, to take 1 extra person, and how much supervision they're going to need, and so on and so forth. How do we actually persuade the smaller businesses to take these people on?
Yeah, and that's why the employer... Sorry.
I was going to say, sorry, we won't say the same thing. That's exactly that problem is why we've put in place this employer support fund, which is directed at those small companies, because we know that it's much harder if you're a smaller company than if you're Amazon. You need to take an additional person, you need to understand, you need some support for that. And so we have the funding for the college to reach out to those employers, but then we also now have this fund for those employers to actually help them in the additional burden for them, if you like, of taking on a T-level student. So we're trying to address both ends of that. And the other element I was just going to add is we've also done some dedicated work with the health service over the last year to really work with them on how to take more placements. It's great to hear that your college has got some really great placements. I too have seen T-level students who are doing brilliant things with the hospital, often over the road from the college. But we had some trusts who were a bit more reticent, who weren't very clear about how this would work and how could they take on 16-year-olds. So we actually worked with the NHS to have what we call placement coordinators. We had 7 of those over the last year. They've done a brilliant job. We've seen the placement levels rise really substantially.
More than tripled.
So yes, exactly. So we're going to fund them again for another year. And that's really important, because I think in the health service there's a massive opportunity. I've also heard of students who not only are doing their placement in the hospital, but they're then, instead of doing their part-time work in say, retail or hospitality, they're actually doing their part-time work in the hospital. So there's a sort of double win for the student and for the hospital. So we see that there's a really great win-win situation across the health service, but we wanted to help to enable that to happen. So it's those sorts of things that we continue to try to think about and innovate. So we will track what happens with this employer support fund, and as we've said throughout, iterate it if there's more or different that we need to do to help small employers.
That's a really helpful answer. I've asked for Cirencester for a follow-up visit, and I shall certainly ask those questions as to what sort of relationship they have with our local ICB. Sarah Hall, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I've also been doing a lot of work with education providers and employers in my constituency with a variety of sectors. So we've got some really big sectors in Warrington South, and Warrington as a whole. We've got the nuclear sector, engineering, electricians, and so forth. But we also have an upcoming skills shortage. So we're looking at how we can create that Warrington skills pipeline. And from one of the common responses that I seem to get from the employers that I'm meeting is that there is a reluctance to take on students for placements due to concerns around practical application. So they would rather have a young person that they can train from scratch with the skills that they need straight away and get them on and training in that way rather than necessarily in the classroom. Last week I met Stuart, who is an electrician who set up a training academy himself, and he works with our local UTC. And the idea being that young people, 16-year-olds, can go into that kind of mock-up facility where they can learn to wire up plugs and get all the basics done in a very quick turnaround. It's like 4-week period, whilst also doing the classroom work as well. So I guess my question is, well, 2 questions. One, do you think that the balance between classroom time and practical time is right? And 2, what's being done to ensure that education providers and employers are working symbiotically and really understanding what employers' needs are and how that is evolving through time?
So I might bring Carmel in on the design of T-levels. I mean, I think, again, it is important to say they're kind of part of a wider skills landscape. They're a really important qualification, but they aren't the only one. And I mean, in a sense, the lesson from some of that work on that Carmel was describing on catering and hair barbering, beauty therapy, is that you have to really understand what the right skills pathway is for the occupation. So T-levels are designed for places where there is both an important kind of core element that you need to master and some practical elements, and they seek to bring those together. And then that's been designed collaboratively with employers. So employers have shaped exactly what's in both the core and the occupational specialism as part of the T-level. I think that those questions about kind of have we got that balance perfectly right are exactly the sort of questions we keep iterating and asking the question about, we keep hearing from students about and from employers about, and we will work through every time we're kind of working through the qualification. I mean, interestingly, again, lots of this depends on who you talk to, doesn't it? One of the things I've had from employers is people worried about taking a 16-year-old into their business and sort of them not knowing anything and being able to do anything, and being really pleasantly surprised by how much the students know and can do because they've gone through. So again, typically students will do their work placement in the later part of the T-level, having got quite a strong grounding in through their core. And so, I mean, I've certainly had employers say to me, we were a bit worried this would feel a bit like giving someone just really long work experience and they were going to make a lot of tea for us. And actually they turned up and they knew a lot and they could do a lot and they could really contribute to the business and do things that were worthwhile. So I think keeping on kind of testing and asking ourselves those questions about the balance is absolutely right. I don't know if you wanted to...
Yeah, so in terms of the design, so the original design of the T-level was the core, Secretary's just mentioned. So that's sort of the knowledge of a sector, and then the specialism is the practical side. But throughout that, we also have an employer set projects that is set by employers, and that happens quite early on. And what we found in the rollout of T-levels is that many providers are not just teaching the core for a year and then moving into the specialism. They're actually starting to teach the specialism much earlier so that you're getting that practical application, you're taking the knowledge, you're applying it practically, and then those that are going out on placement are then able to apply it. So there's quite the model has evolved since the early days of T-levels.
One of the issues that comes up with me repeatedly is, you know, if you're training to be an electrician, for instance, and you've got a young person or engineering and you turn up on site and you don't know how to use, you know, you may have read about how in the classroom how to use these things, but you know there's concerns that they won't know on the day when they turn up how to use the tools and whatever's needed.
I mean, often the T-level students, they will use those sorts of tools in their college, and that's partly why we provided the additional money for the specialist equipment. So that they
do you think that's a communication issue then? Do you think that employers that's not feeding through to employers?
Absolutely, we need to keep ensuring that those fears that employers have, that we can show that they're not the case. And it's even the best way of doing that is for colleges to have those deep connections to their local employers, and for local employers to then come and not only see the college but work with the college. I was in a college recently where one of the local employers is actually funding themselves some additional kit in the college, because that kit is what they use.
That's happening in my local UTC as well, and that's best practice. But that's the gold standard. That's how it should be. But my concern is that happening elsewhere? Is that generally happening more widely?
I mean, I have seen it in multiple colleges where, and partly because we gave that additional funding for specialist equipment, where the colleges have bought that equipment. It's obviously very difficult to have exactly the same equipment for every single employer in your locality, so they have to get something which is the best fit that they can have. But certainly I've seen many T-level students who are operating that within the college and then being able to apply those skills when they get into the industry placement. But as we said, we know that we want to keep building this, we want to keep understanding. So yes, there's something about, as you say, giving that information to employers, but there's also about hearing from employers if they've got a concern on the programme itself, or if they've got a concern in a particular place. But the best thing is for the college and the employers to talk together. And I know the colleges do an awful lot of work. One of the things we should recognise is that none of this would have happened without the schools and colleges doing tremendous work in the last 4 years to build this. And they have done some amazing work to get this programme up and running to the great place it's in. And the relationships they've built with local employers are incredibly strong. But as always, we want to keep building that and keep supporting them to make them even stronger.
Julia, the longer you give evidence, the more questions you put in my mind. So I'm going to ask you a couple.
I hear all day.
I've got a couple of questions, then we're going to take a very short break, but I do mean a short break. We were discussing a minute or two ago about working with the local health bodies. What work are you doing with other government departments? For example, the Department of Business or the Department of Science. I can see lots of possibilities if I think about this.
We're doing an awful lot of work with them, as you probably hope. So we talk to them an awful lot, not just about T-levels, but about the skills picture across the piece, and understanding the skills landscape, and understanding the Skills England particularly actually are leading work at the moment, understanding the skills gaps within specific industries, which is done jointly with those departments, also with the work that they're doing with employers, but bringing those departments and the employers with Skills England together to understand those skills gaps. And then we work closely with them on understanding, well, what's the best way to fit those gaps? So is it through apprenticeships? Is it through T-levels? Is it through something else that they particularly need? That work is partly what led to the construction package that we've recently announced. But that's not the only area where we're doing having those conversations. That does include defence, it includes digital, it includes across the piece. So, and one of the things that we also do within that is we talk to other departments about T-levels and about where they fit and about how they can be used to great advantage in their different sectors and their different spheres. And that's really positive and allows us to solve problems on skills gaps collectively across government. So it's a large part of my team and my job to really make sure that's a whole government effort.
Very good. Final question from me. How will you work with local skills improvement plans, LSIPs, to increase the number and range of industry placements available?
Excuse me. It's a very good question, and so the local skills improvement plans that are there, run by the local employer representative bodies. They're also relatively new, but they've been really successful in setting out the needs of that particular place and the employers in that particular place. We do talk to them about where do T-levels fit within that, and we've encouraged them to have conversations around that employer representative body table about how could they actually, as a group, provide more placements and encourage other employers to provide more placements. We want to continue doing that. We've also recently, in the devolution white paper, we were clear that those LSIPs, as we term them, that they should be jointly owned by the mayoral strategic authorities as well as the employer representative bodies. And we have conversations with the mayoral strategic authorities as well about the really important role that they can play in helping to bring T-level placements in their area because of the connections and the strong connections they have to business. So it's an area where we want to keep using all the tools at our disposal to really try to maximise provision.
Very helpful. We've really examined placements, I think, quite in detail. So I think we will have a short break now, and I really mean a short break. I think if we could come back at sort of about 11:55, so just over the 5 minutes, and really be in our place well before that. So we will now take a short break and return by 11:55. Order. Order. Welcome back to the committee's hearing on introducing T-levels. And to help us start with that, Anna Dixon, please.
Thank you. So in the NAO report, paragraph 2.8, it shows this decline year on year in the numbers passing. I also understand from my local college that it's really only if you pass with merit that it sort of really counts for anything. And I didn't see the breakdown here about the sort of pass with merit ratings. Those sort of numbers, I guess, in terms of comparability to A-levels and other technical qualifications where, you know, you were at 97, 98, 99%. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit about why there has been this decline both in completions and passing, and what you would be expecting a target for that in the future.
Thank you very much. So the pass rates have been over 90% for all of the first 3 T-level cohorts, and about 2/3 of those get a merit or above. And incidentally, I don't agree that a pass is not worth having. They're well respected and they lead to great progression for learners even at pass. What we've seen is that so over time we've introduced more T-levels each year. So each year you're comparing some T-levels that are established and others that are new and being taught for the first time, and we would always expect to see some development in pass rates as a qualification gets better established and people understand it more. And we have seen really strong pass rates in some of the qualifications that have been running for longer. So the highest pass rate is in the education and early years T-level, which was one of the first introduced. I mean, actually, that's been strong since its first year of operation, but that's sat around the 98% mark. Whereas, for example, digital business services had a 76% pass rate in its first year of operation, but has risen to 97% in its second year of operation. So you have to disaggregate a little bit within that headline, looking at how long the T-level has been in operation for.
You'd actually be expecting that longer established ones you would want, so that was my sort of second part of the question, was what are you aiming at as a sort of...
We don't set a target for it, but we would expect to see pass rates slowly rise as the qualification gets more established and better understood. The other thing that is a countervailing factor, though, is that we started by only allowing colleges that were good or outstanding to teach T-levels, and have then opened them up to a wider range of providers. And you'd expect good and outstanding colleges to see stronger pass rates than less high-performing colleges. And so you're seeing a little bit of that, I think, in the change over time. So I think the two things you're seeing in the pass rates at the moment are we're still introducing new T-levels each year, and that's shaping the picture, and we're growing the number of providers. And so we'd expect to see that settle as we get all of the T-levels introduced and as we expand to the full range of providers.
And in terms of sort of completion, I mean, the other factor in the report is those that do foundation not necessarily progressing. So again, what would you be wanting to do to ensure that those that start, more of them complete, and particularly more of those that take the foundation do go on to complete the full T-level?
Yes, there's two things there, aren't there? There's the completion rate for the T-levels themselves, where we do see some learners change pathway. We actually also see some learners drop out of the T-levels and into work. So some people don't finish, they go and work out of the placement, which may feel like a good short-term outcome for the student. But again, we have been working with colleges and with employers to try and say, look, even if you think this person is great and you want to take them straight off their work placement, do support them to complete their T-level rather than just getting them into a job. And we work with by route and by provider on that completion rate to look at what's driving lower completion rates and to try and address it. On the T-level foundation year, we see the T-level foundation year leading well to level 3 study in general, but it's leading better to overall level 3 study than it is to T-levels themselves. So it's actually got a better progression rate into level 3 study than most level 2 qualifications do, but the proportion of that is T-level is still very low, and that is something we're looking at, and something that has also been picked up on and focused on by the curriculum and assessment review, so we're looking at that as part of the CARS work as well.
Yes.
I mean, on this very point, in the report, I was going to actually ask about this later, but it is quite a low figure. It says in 21-2, 85% of the 3,194 starting the course, that's the foundation course, from which only 8% progressed onto a T-level. That does seem to be maybe an out-of-date figure because it was 21-2, but it does seem a very low conversion rate.
So it is much lower than we would want it to have been, and so we started the T-level foundation year with the expectation this would have a higher conversion rate. As the Permanent Secretary says, one of the positive outcomes of it is having quite a high conversion rate into other level 3s. So these are people who weren't necessarily ready to go straight into a level 3. They are now progressing into a level 3. But we've been doing some work to try and understand, well, why is it that they're not converting into the T-level? And some of that's around the people who are being put onto this weren't necessarily the ones who wanted to go onto T-level necessarily. They were put onto this as a way of improving their skills to take a jump to level 3, which isn't a negative, so we should take the positives of what we've learned. But we are reviewing how could we actually make this programme more dedicated towards successful progression into the T-level. And as the Permanent Secretary says, it's one of the areas that Professor Becky Francis has just wants to look at in her curriculum and assessment review, which is due to come to fruition in the autumn. So she's looking at the moment about that, and we're obviously engaging with her on that, because it's an area where we would like to see more people progress into the T-level from that foundation year. So we're trying to understand what's the positive that's allowed people to progress to level 3. Let's not lose that, but how could we capture that and then potentially have something which is more specific for T-level progression, so what's not worked in that. So that's work that's underway at the moment, but it's a very good point that we are very conscious of.
I don't want to steal your thunder, Anna, but I'm just wondering whether Anna has actually pointed a finger earlier in one of her earlier questions, is the perception amongst some of the youngsters is that these T-levels are quite difficult and involve a lot of work, and that's why they maybe we could do more in that foundation year to actually show them that these are thoroughly worthwhile qualifications.
It's a good point, and one of the things that we would like to do more of is to really, some of the statistics we've given you today about the really positive outcomes, I think we should shout more about and make sure that people understand that, because if you as a student could see that 3/4 of people who went on to employment went into the higher level apprenticeships, that's a good selling point, isn't it, and something that's really positive. We have also seen the retention rate generally improve, so it's jumped from 68% in 2021 to 73% in 2022. That's for those who started the T-level at age 16. That compares to the retention rate for large VTQs, which are sort of the closest similar qualification, at 78%. So that's a 5 percentage point gap. We'd obviously like to close that gap, but it is closing over time. So again, we would hope that would continue. And as the Permanent Secretary says, some students leave to go into work. That's a double-edged sword. Yes, it's a positive that they've gone into work, but we would really like them to complete the T-level. For others, we saw particularly early on it was a new qualification. They didn't necessarily understand. They changed their mind about what they wanted to do. And then some of it came back to some of the feedback about that volume of assessment, which is exactly why IFATE have made some of those changes. So we're hopeful that through the iterative process and the way that we're changing things, that increase in retention rate will continue.
It was obviously very important to listen to those students who are exiting early and understanding why. So it sounds like you have done some of that work and are now seeking to address those factors. Can I ask whether you've done the analysis to break down by socioeconomic status, by race or gender, as to who's dropping out and who's sustaining to completion?
We do look at the programme in those breakdowns, exactly. We tend to see that the breakdowns aren't particularly different for T-levels than other qualifications. We have a slightly higher percentage of those with special educational needs taking T-level than A-level, but a slightly lower percentage of special educational needs taking T-level than the other VTQs, vocational and technical qualifications. So across in terms of male-female split, it's largely the same. In terms of socio-economic split, it's largely the same.
Sorry, I just want to get clear. You've sort of preempted where I was going next. But I was talking about those who are not completers.
Yep.
The 26%, I can't remember where you were, of people who are starting a T-level and not completing, whether there is a disproportionate representation amongst the group of people not completing who perhaps are poorer or from minoritised backgrounds or women.
We haven't seen that come out in the data, but we will continue to monitor that, because it's a really important point, and if that were the case, we'd obviously want to make adjustments if that were the case. Because it's really important that these are accessible to everyone. That's part of the intent of the programme. They're a great opportunity, and we want to make sure that opportunity is available to everybody.
Okay. So if I may then come on to the sort of those who are enrolling on T-levels and which subjects. So again, looking at the data, you started to mention it there, there are some groups that are underrepresented in general, compared to some of the other vocational qualifications, such as special educational needs, who seems more propensity to take up other level 3 qualifications than a T-level, but also underrepresentation of women. Now, this seems to be particularly since the introduction of what are male stereotyped subjects such as engineering and manufacturing. And so you know, we were talking earlier about sort of simulation. We saw some brilliant example when we did a committee visit to BAE Systems of a simulated environment for learning welding skills. And we met some of the female welders who were particularly prized because they could access some of the very more difficult to access parts, and were doing some of the very high-end welding, which was great. You know, I guess likewise on the sort of healthcare side, probably a greater propensity to see women in those areas. You talked about early years. Wouldn't it be great? I know some of my early years providers want to attract more men into early years settings. I don't see yet that you have adult social care there. I hope that as we professionalise adult social care, opportunities perhaps for more advanced level training through T-levels might become available there. How do we, I mean, what is your view about how do we, and this may not be through changing T-levels themselves, but other things that go on earlier in children's education and setting career expectations, how we challenge gender stereotypes so that we get better gender balance in the range of T-level subjects that you are offering, and therefore equip hopefully women to go on to some of those better paid jobs as well.
I think this is incredibly important, and I think, I mean, what we see, I mean, it's exactly as you described. We don't see something that's kind of peculiar to T-levels. It's about the kind of route and occupation. So it's the sex breakdowns are roughly similar between T-levels and other technical vocational qualifications in similar areas, but they still are massively disproportionate. You are still significantly more likely to be studying engineering if you're a man and childcare if you're a woman, and that's absolutely something we've got to kind of keep addressing and looking at. And I think you're also right to identify that as something that we need to look at earlier in the system than that kind of moment of decision making at 16, because I think by then people have kind of, you know, both may have taken preparatory steps that lead them down particular routes, and may have kind of formed particular views or assumptions. And I think there's a huge piece of work to do with schools, with careers providers, actually with employers, in showing those kinds of examples that you described from BAE Systems, but also I think learning from some of the areas where we've seen some of those disparities shift a bit over time. So if you look at what's happened in maths, it used to be a sort of axiomatic truth of our system that boys would outperform girls in maths, and girls are slowly and steadily overtaking. And that might be a different problem, but the narrative is changing around that, and you hear much less commonly now than you did when I did my 2 maths A-levels that maths was a boys' subject. And looking at how we've shifted some of those perceptions where we have moved it and trying to apply that. So again, I think we lag in the vocational and technical space behind where we've got to in some of those more academic qualifications. Again, it's not perfect there either, still in issues in physics, computer science and so on. But I think we've got to really kind of look at that and address it. But I don't think it's a T-level problem. I think you see it across the range of vocational and technical qualifications.
Yes, but it is more of a problem in vocational and technical qualifications.
I think it is more of a problem in vocational and technical qualifications than it is in academic.
Yeah. I mean, ironically, if I may, Chair, suggest a reverse innovation. I went to Zimbabwe and I was looking there at an amazing programme of re-engaging adolescent girls in education and going on to vocational training. The Open University from here had partnered in rewriting the school curriculum. So one of the lessons I observed, the girls were learning about, Dee the driver. And so in all of their teaching materials, they were challenging gender stereotypes. So when I asked them which of the vocational courses they were going to, tiling, electrician, carpentry, alongside baking and hairdressing, but there was a much greater propensity that these young women in Zimbabwe were seeing these vocational skills and they had very, very intentionally redesigned the whole curriculum to challenge gender stereotyping. So, maybe your colleagues leading the curriculum review would help us to challenge this so that in the future, when we come back to look at this, these T-levels will be seeing much greater gender balance across the subjects than we are here. I think that probably is all I want to say, unless there's anything else that you want to say about what you're doing to both monitor and address any inequalities in sort of uptake of T-levels.
As Permanent Secretary says, we would really like to reverse that, but it's not just a T-level factor. We do have lots of programmes that we've been running which are around girls through to STEM. Those have had some success over the years, but I think you're absolutely right. It's something that we need to keep working on. We see the T-level disparity in the same way as we see in the VTQ disparity, but part of what we like to do is we like to promote girls who've done really successfully in the non-typical areas. So one of our winners in our awards was a digital T-level student who went on to be successful in a digital apprenticeship, who's a woman. We didn't pick her necessarily because she was a woman, but it's great to be able to celebrate those role models. And we also, I know that colleges do a lot of that as well, of promoting that and being, being really clear that they do have women in these courses. But as you say, there's more that we want to do and keep doing.
Really important subject. Thank you, Anna Dixon, very much. Michael Payne, please.
Thank you, Sir Geoffrey, and thank you to our guests. I have a few questions, but just before I do, Miss Kinniburgh, I think you said that we should be shouting louder about the positive outcomes. I think everybody in this committee and around the country would agree with that, but I also think it requires, on the flip side of the coin, you to be honest about the candid failings that there have been about the introduction of the T-Levels programme. We've heard some incredibly impressive numbers today about the outcomes, which should be incredibly welcome, particularly for those individual students. But if I may just gently suggest, they ignore the large numbers of dropouts that there have been in T-Levels over the years. So if I just may, before I ask my first question, reflect on 3 points that I've heard from both the NAO report, but also representations I've had from the Red Hill Academy Trust in my own constituency, a large education provider with an excellent reputation in my constituency. In 2021, a third of all T-level entrants dropped out of their course. That clearly was a failing, and I think you've addressed some of the reasons about why that might be in the journey that they're on. The DFE's own data, and you've touched on this, Miss Kinniburgh, suggests that students who take T-levels are more likely to drop out than in any of the other equivalent level 3 qualifications. And finally, there's been close to, at this point last year, April last year, £1.8 billion, the Chair touched on this, spent on the T-level programme. Yet at that point last year in April, the T-levels programme had reached only 3% of the 16 to 19-year-old population in this country. May I just gently suggest, before I ask my first question, that it's not exactly been a smooth rollout of the T-levels programme, has it? And it's not been without its own failings. And I think if we are going to get on to a point where we're delivering genuinely for students in the way that the government set out, we need to be doing much more about being robust and rigorous about the failings that there have been, because education leaders and the students I speak to, I think have got serious questions about whether T-levels can genuinely provide some of the opportunity that perhaps qualifications like the BTECs did. And I've certainly heard that from education providers in
Michael,
my area.
I suggest you've made some important points there. I think we should give our witnesses a chance to come back on
of
some
course,
of that, please.
Of course.
Do you want?
Shall we start? In terms of the dropouts, so as we've said, that we have seen the dropout rate was higher than it has been for other qualifications. These are, though, pretty much brand new qualifications. So if you think T-levels have been around since 2020, whereas A-levels have been around for 74 years, it does take time to establish a qualification. They're also being established whilst we have other qualifications alongside them. Now, that's a deliberate decision, and the government took a decision in December to keep some of those other qualifications for longer. But that does make it more challenging in terms of ramping up the programme. When we introduced GCSEs, we didn't keep O-levels running at the same time. But there's a deliberate decision here. But we have seen those retention rates increase, and we have seen that. I think you questioned whether this was sort of value for money in terms of the success. I think the stats that we've given you today hopefully speak for themselves in terms of the success for those individuals. We are seeing that people who are taking the T-levels are going into much higher proportions of them are going into these higher level apprenticeships. They also do have the opportunity to go into higher education, and that we've seen that employers are saying, actually, once we've dipped our toe in the water of taking a T-level placement, you can see that from the Amazon numbers we quoted, for example, from 6 to 100, they are seeing this as a real advantage. So you asked us whether this is what we would expect. I think you do expect a programme like this to have to grow over time, and I think we are seeing it grow as we would want. Now, always we would want things to be better, that's I think a good thing. We will always challenge ourselves to.
We always want to be ambitious.
Yes, to be ambitious for the programme, and we would like these rates to continue to rise. But we're also not sitting back and saying, well, that's just the way it is. We are saying, okay, well, what is it that's driving? If it's a slightly lower retention rate, what can we do to increase that? How can we work with everybody who's involved in the system to really drive those up? So I think that's really important. And I think we continually look at I think one of the important things for students is to be really clear about their different options and their pathways through, and so that they can see their pathways. And IFATE have done some great work on occupational pathways, which means that as an individual you can look and see where could you get to, what are your different routes. Showing how T-levels fit into that pathway, I think, is really, really important. But there are other options for students at 16, and enabling them to weigh those up and see the different options and outcomes. I think that's why, as you've reiterated, sharing those outcomes is really important, because then people can make an informed choice about what they want to do. So, yes, we would want all of these figures to be at the top that they could possibly be, but I don't think this programme is in a different place to where we would necessarily have expected it to be 4 to 5 years in, and the outcomes data that we've seen is actually really, really positive, and we're really pleased about that.
Thank you. I suppose what I was probing at, really, before moving on to my substantive questions, is that there's been this reprieve announced by, and I understand some of these are ministerial decisions, policy decisions, a reprieve announced by the Secretary of State in relation to the BTECs. You will know that there is noise in the sector about the future of this, and I guess what I'm pushing at is, as officials, as people very close to this, as people who are clearly passionate about the programme, I just want to ensure, Ms Dixon touched on this, that ministers are going to get a candid and honest representation back about how the system's working. Because clearly there are positives, and I'm not churlish about this. I've recognised that there are positives, but I think it also relies on us being very candid and honest about where the failings have been, and there clearly have been some failings. Your own data reflects that there have been some failings. I recognise that the programme's on a journey. I recognise, as Ms Kinniburgh says, that running qualifications at the same time, there's a challenge, placements issues, as the Chair has already touched on, but I think it's incredibly important as ministers make what is a critical decision that could affect life chances of young people in the country, one of the biggest stated missions of this government, that they get a very candid and honest reflection back from you as officials. And it sounds like, I'm seeing nods from the Permanent Secretary, Miss Acland-Hood, it sounds like ministers are going to get a very honest reflection about success and the failings.
It's critically important, and I hope you've heard us talk about the things that we've reflected on that we think we can improve through the programme. But of course, we must give ministers a really kind of candid and thoughtful and honest set of reflections. And the December announcement around the the Qualifications Reform Review was about trying to take a really, really well-evidenced and pragmatic approach. So what we've done is we've said, we've identified qualifications we will continue to defund now, particularly those with low and no take-up, but also some where there is, the T-level pathway is really well evidenced, the overlap is high. We think that it causes confusion for students to have too many overlapping. We still have thousands and thousands of qualifications across our system. We have many, many more than, again, comparative jurisdictions around the world that have strong vocational and technical systems. So it's right that we keep asking those questions. But we also really recognise that the change is hard, that people worry about whether there are good alternatives, and that we've got to kind of keep thoughtfully assessing that and reflecting on it case by case. And I think, the one thing I would say is, I think the evidence doesn't take you to a place where you would want to be saying blanket, all of these stay or all of these go. It's much more about that kind of route by route, really well evidenced assessment of kind of, well, what are each of these pathways doing for young people? What is the evidence on their progression and outcomes? And kind of going back to the kind of origin of T-levels and why the Wolf and then the Sainsbury Review recommended them in the first place, which was that we have to be really careful that we don't conflate the achievement of a grade in a qualification with a longer term outcome for it. So again, I don't want to pick on any particular qualifications, but we see some of the kind of pre-existing vocational and technical qualifications where, for example, you might get 3 distinction stars, but you still are only as likely to get a good outcome in university as someone who got 3 Ds at A level. Now that's telling you something about whether the label we're putting on the qualification is actually delivering the thing that we're promising students through the label, and that's something we have to keep testing ourselves on. And that's hard, right, because we want qualifications that recognise and reward students, but we also want to make sure we're being straight and honest with them about what they can expect that label, that qualification to lead to in their university outcomes. And again, that the work that we've done on what kind of apprenticeship do you progress into? I actually think in preparing for this committee, it has surprised me. I didn't, Julia probably knew because she's all over it, but I didn't know until I sat and prepared for this committee that for many of our pre-existing level 3 qualifications, you are more likely, significantly more likely to go on and do an apprenticeship that repeats level 3 or is at level 2 than you are to do a higher or a degree level apprenticeship. And those stats are effectively flipped on their head for T-level. So over 75% of people going into an apprenticeship from other level 3 qualifications repeat level 3 or do a level 2 apprenticeship. It's literally the other way around for T-levels. You're massively more likely to go into a higher or a degree level apprenticeship. Now that is telling us something about the quality and depth of the preparation that you're getting through the qualification. And we have to balance the recognition that means T-levels are highly demanding, so they may not be suitable for everybody, and we need to make sure there are routes available for all learners, with not providing routes that feel kind of seductively easier to... It's back to Anna Dixon's point, actually, that they're not... We don't provide things that look seductively more attractive, easier to pass, easier to get a good result in, but don't actually give you the outcome in the workplace that you really want for the child going through the rest of their lives. And that's a hard balance to strike. And I think the heart of some of the challenges in delivery so far have been about how you calibrate and get that balance right. And I think it's right that we keep testing, and you keep testing us on it, because it's not straightforward. But there's something really critical at the heart of this, which is about giving young people in vocational and technical routes really high quality qualifications that lead to great outcomes for them. T-levels are not the only qualification that are high quality, but we need to keep making sure we set that standard and we reinforce it and we give people good opportunities. Sorry, it's very long.
No, thank you. No, I appreciate your candour. If I may just turn, Chair, to awarding of contracts as a sort of general subject, perhaps a question to the Permanent Secretary and to Miss Grant. Figure 11 in the NAO report highlights that the actual student numbers, and I accept that this is at September 2022, but this was the data available, and to be fair, it is over a 2-year period from 2020, so I think you can draw conclusions at that point from it. It shows that actual student numbers at that point, September 2022, had been below contract assumptions quite significantly, actually, across 15 out of the 16 then T-levels that had been introduced. And I suppose my opening question is, why did you agree contracts based on assumptions and student numbers that were incredibly ambitious without building in any real flexibility in terms of those contracts? I mean, if you took an example in the NAO report, the healthcare science T-level, but you could pick any of them, 136 at the point student enrolment numbers, but contract assumption numbers for student numbers 3,500. There's a significant gap there, isn't there? And there is a significant gap across 15 of the 16 T-levels. And so I just want to push this point about the awarding of the contracts at that point, and I recognise some lessons might have been learned since, but why wasn't that flexibility built into the contracts? And also, just as a follow-up, if I may, why wasn't there really any scope for those organisations who were awarded the contracts to challenge the assumptions at that point, if you like, candidly, around some of the student numbers? If you could maybe just touch on that, Permanent Secretary, as well.
Yeah. So, and I'll bring Carmel in because I think we're very close to this process. I think the starting point was that there'd be value in having the suppliers invested in meeting and going for the kind of targeted volumes. I think, and so the kind of, in a sense, the structure of the contract was to make those assumptions and to ask them to price on the basis of those assumptions, but they had the opportunity to price on that basis, and they did have the opportunity to challenge that, actually. I mean, they could have, in a sense, they could have priced with more kind of flex around that. I think what we saw was, and again, Colin might want to come in, I think in their efforts to win contracts, some providers set pricing quite low on the assumption that the volume would sort them out. And one of our lessons learnt was that was then quite challenging for providers when the volumes didn't come through. And that's why in the second generation of contracts, we've designed that differently to give a little bit more, again, to try and keep some incentive, because we do want providers to be incentivised to encourage people to take these qualifications. We think they're really good, and that's part of what you do when you set up a new qualification. But we've moderated that a bit with the approach we've taken for the second generation. Carmel, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, so in that first phase, and the original contracts were set, were awarded back in 2019 onwards. So that baseline at the time was based on a number of assumptions, the best known information at that point in time. And clearly, as the implementation has progressed, more information has come out about the way T-levels are delivered, about the interaction with the defunding phasing as well. And we're in a position now, as we move into phase 2 of the procurement, where the modelling has been done annually, has been updated, and so we're going into that with a more informed range of student estimates. And the Permanent Secretary mentioned about some of the bids that were pitched for the learner fees. We've got more information now on how those fees will be better pitched when you compare the T level to doing 3A levels. So there's sort of similar sort of range. And it's probably fair to say that the development and delivery of T levels has required significant time, resource and investment. High quality qualifications that have been quite different from the existing market, and it's been a learning curve for everybody involved. And I think to design those qualifications to allow progression to employment has taken quite a different approach. And again, as we move into that second phase, that's much better known by ourselves, by the awarding market. And we are running new procurements as we speak and continuing to get awarding organisations coming forward to our market engagement events as well. So we're seeing higher numbers of organisations coming forward for the market engagement interest. So I think it's that sort of lessons as we've gone through the first phase into the second phase.
Thank you. It's that helpful segue. I think the Permanent Secretary and yourself, Ms Grant, touched on the second phase. Just in terms of the second phase, just a question around why the second phase contracts are so much more expensive than the first phase contracts, which is drawn out in the NAO report and you will recognise. And perhaps, I don't know, Permanent Secretary and Miss Grant, whether you want to say something about the risks necessarily associated with the second phase contracts. And then a very specific point, the NAO touches on, I think you can call it a fiasco around the health T-level that there was, particularly in relation to the Northern College for Further Education. In July 2024, Ofqual imposed a £300,000 penalty on an FCE, and it wasn't a one-off incident, there were a series of incidents. I think you're now assured that we've kind of turned a corner in relation to that particular area, but I suppose there's a broader question for the committee about how you can reassure us that we're not going to see a repeat incident in the way that we did around the health T-level in that regard. So just a question about the price disparity and the significant disparity in the price second phase compared to first phase, maybe a point about the risks, and then just specifically about reassurance around the issues there were in relation to the health T-level.
Just come in on the price piece. It refers back to sort of my previous response around the pitching of fees in the first phase, which were lower as an entry to the market, and as we've stabilised over time, recognising what it actually costs for those learner fees. So it's basically regularising that element, and that's why they've become more expensive across most of the contracts. So it's a more realistic figure to deliver the contracts. In terms of the risk in the second phase, recognising the risk we've had with learner numbers in the first phase, we have introduced something called adaptive pricing, and that will, where learner numbers are much lower than the current estimate or the predicted estimates, there will be a mechanism to potentially adjust, and the same if they're much higher, so a 15% factor. So that's a sort of a way of allowing more awarding organisations to look at what this means in going forward, and that realise that there is something that could be adjusted if that's where the way the learner numbers materialise. But having said that, the learner numbers have been modelled year on year, and we're getting more accurate information. But hopefully that's an element of protection in that second phase of contracts.
Thank you.
Would you like me to pick up on the NCFE
Please,
question? Yeah. So yes, in 2022 there was an issue with the core element of the health and science T-level, and there was in that element there were questions in there which were not of the right rigour or content standard. As these are properly regulated qualifications, Ofqual took the action that they would take for any properly regulated qualification. Now, for the students, that meant that those elements were that was discounted. They were remarked and their results were issued. Those students were also given the option of a free retake if they wanted to do that. But Ofqual took the regulatory action that is within their remit to take, hence the significant fine for NCFE. Both Ofqual and IFE have also done a lot of work with NCFE to ensure that that type of error couldn't happen again, and to make sure that they have very good quality assurance and rigour in their standard setting. So it was very unfortunate. But rightly, Ofqual took the regulatory action that they would for any other error in a qualification. So that's the instance of the health and science T-level.
Yeah, I'm completely aware of the incident, what action Ofqual took and why they took it. I guess my broader point was just about how you try and ensure, if you can, a mitigation against that being repeated, because clearly what Ofqual touched on is, as you said, not fit for purpose questions, inadequate training for assessors, a wide range of other issues, and it's just how maybe you can safeguard in the system against that happening. I recognise that obviously this is also down to individual institutions, but I think there's some reflection in the NO report that lessons have been learnt. A final question, if I may, Chair, just a broad question in relation to the challenges. I think you touched on this, Miss Grant, around the market. I just wondered what action can be taken by the department, by other organisations involved in the T-level programme around sustainability of the market going forward, given some of the challenges there have been that I think you've elucidated on throughout today's session. From your perspective, what particular action can you take, or are you proposing to take to make sure there's a sustainability in the market going forward?
I mean, there's a number of things we've done. The adaptive pricing shift was one of them. That's a deliberate decision that change, that enables awarding organisations to have more certainty. It changes the risk profile for them in terms of bidding. IFE themselves do an awful lot of outreach to organisations when they go through their recontracting. I think as Carmel's just referred to, we have good numbers of people coming to those various market events to make sure that people understand. We also do an awful lot of engagement, not just with the awarding organisations, but with other professional bodies as well, who may want to enter the market in due course. So we're continuing to look at the market. I don't know, Carmel, if you want to add anything.
Yes, we've also extended the duration of the contracts. So the original contracts back in 2019 were sort of 4 annual cohorts plus potential to extend by 1. We extended that a couple of years ago to 5 plus 2 extensions, and now the contracts that are going into this phase are 5 cohorts with extension to 3, so that makes them more viable, longer term proposition, and that is proving attractive as well in terms of other organisations considering entering the market, and they can enter as an individual organisation themselves or subcontract or a consortium as well. So there's different models to help bring additional organisations into that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Dixon.
Yeah, just for clarification, because it seems in this first period that these awarding organisations effectively had a monopoly, and therefore, you know, if the providers were a bit at the mercy of the fees that these awarding organisations wanted to charge. So I've understood that you've changed with this adaptive pricing to recognise that if student numbers, I'm guessing, go up, that the price goes down for the provider, to recognise that. But I sort of worry that unless there's going to be competition, and maybe I've missed that in the new procurement, there will be more than one awarding body per T-level.
So the competition is to be the provider of each T-level. So it's a single...
providers will continue to be price takers.
But part of the competition is, part of the assessment of the provider that gets awarded the T-level is to look at whether the fee is reasonable. It's, I do think it's worth saying our analysis is we think actually in that first competition providers are underpriced rather than overpriced. I mean, if you look at the fee cost of 3 A-levels is over £300. Typically, providers were setting £150
Did they then not
fees.
Put the prices up?
So
they weren't fixed to stick with the original thing they'd bid for. They then put the prices up, and when they realised the numbers were going down, did they not put the prices up?
So the price rises you see in the NA report are the prices that have come through the second round of contracting. They haven't been able to unilaterally change prices.
They haven't. Okay.
The issue was that because they priced very low, they were essentially loss leading. They priced low to win the contract, then the volumes were a bit lower, and then some of the AOs have had challenges with that. One of the reasons we've introduced the adaptive pricing is both to protect colleges, but also to make sure the providers aren't holding all of that volume risk themselves. But we don't think the fees they're charging now are unreasonable. We think actually they probably went a bit low in the first instance.
Okay, so how does that leave, and when I say providers, I'm talking about colleges, not the awarding organisations. Where does it leave colleges in terms of any uplift in their funding to reflect the higher fees per student that they will be paying to
As I say, the fees of even the new higher fees are very comparable with the fees for 3 A-levels or for other large vocational and technical qualifications. They're a very small proportion of the total cost to the college as well.
So if it helps to give the figures, the 3 A-level fee is 364, whereas the T-level range is now 214 to 395. So you can see it's very comparable. So whilst there's been
you're confident that for the colleges it's value for money in terms of both the quality and the fee that these awarding organisations are going to be charging? Okay.
And if the volumes go up, the fee will come down exactly as you said as well.
Just use some of the information provided in the NA report to delve a little further into the awarding organisations' costs, because my college tells me that they think there's a tension here, isn't there? Because they think the costs are too high. The awarding organisations, for example, in SCE disclosed the 2.5 million impairment charge. It says it can't challenge the assumptions. Awarding organisations were locked into prices they had set throughout the contract, but the numbers were between 13 and 92% lower than the earlier assumptions, with 7 contracts of 50% or less. There's a real tension here between the prices charged by the awarding organisations, and yet the students may be, but certainly the institutions, feeling they're too high. And the final thing was that in paragraph 3.12, it says that fees have increased between 26% and 148%. So these are big increases that we've seen. Can you just sort of comment on this tension?
Yes, and I think you're right to identify the tension, and it's not surprising that the awarding bodies would like to charge more and the colleges would like to pay less. I mean, that's but I do think focusing on kind of whether the fees that are being charged now look reasonable in the context of fees that are charged for equivalent qualifications, I think is really important. So Julia has given that range of the revised fees, and it does look very comparable both to 3A levels and to large vocational and technical qualifications. The benefit of the adaptive pricing model is that it helps to manage both ends of that equation you describe. So it helps to, what the awarding organisations would say is they had signed up for a price and a set of volume assumptions. I mean, I sort of take the point about them saying they weren't able to challenge them, but I mean, they didn't enter into the contract in the first place. They knew what they were. They had an opportunity to challenge those parts of the contracting. But when the circumstances changed, and particularly the kind of, it is true that the defunding timetable affected it as well as other things, they were then stuck to a price that they'd set, assuming very high volume. The adaptive pricing helps to manage that risk in both directions. So if the volumes go down, the prices can go up, but if the volumes go up, the prices go down. And there's a cap and collar on that, so that's not unlimited as well. It keeps it within a reasonable range. And then for the colleges, that means that if we do see the volumes we're expecting, they can expect to see the prices come down.
Very good.
But it's a very small proportion of the total cost of the qualification of the college. The fee it's sort of visible, and the increases are notable. And again, those big increases I do think are more about the fact that initial prices set looked surprisingly low, and I think that was about providers trying to win the contract.
Okay. How will you ensure that an efficient and effective transfer of responsibility and oversight from IFATE to Skills England?
So we are well on with the transfer and the work that is going on. We're obviously we have a bill about to come back to the Lords, and you will know better than anybody, you can't preempt the decisions of Parliament, but we have set Skills England up in shadow form, and the work that is going on between IFATE colleagues and Skills England colleagues to make sure that, subject to the will of Parliament, we have a very smooth transition. I actually would like to put on record my thanks to colleagues across IFATE who have done the most incredible job, and it's not always the easiest thing to do when you're feeling uncertainty about your organisation. So I want to say thank you to Carmel, but also to colleagues across the whole of IFATE who've done a brilliant job on that. And Carmel, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that, but there's very precise, really detailed work going on the transition, on how we make sure that delivery to learners and interactions with employers feel completely seamless through that change.
Yeah. I mean, IFATE is now still relatively new, but a very mature organisation. So actually the transition to Skills England feels like a switch over that should be unnoticeable from our outside stakeholders. So all the work we do on our projects and developments, including T-levels, should move across smoothly, or the employers that we work with. So a lot of work has gone into keeping that stable whilst we make that transition, and being clear on the division of roles and responsibilities in the new Skills England era. So.
I suppose the final question is, as a department Permanent Secretary, how confident are you that you have the capabilities to develop and manage these commercial relationships and arrangements, given the sort of edginess and the tension that I've described?
So I think we are seeing really promising signs as we go through the kind of second phase, and again we've got good market interest and engagement in the ones that are out at the moment, and we've had a good response to the shift in the mechanisms, both that shift to the adaptive pricing and the extension in the duration. So I think we're in a much stronger place, and again we work very closely with IFATE, and it will be with Skills England as it transfers over. We also make sure, for example, that our Audit and Risk Committee looks at some of these issues regularly. So we think quite hard about the both the accountability and the governance around this, both within IFATE and Skills England, and kind of just drawing that through appropriately into the department to help us manage the risks.
I'll just put to you a final question. something that my Cirencester College has said in a note to me. If there was no or much more limited clawback, less extreme administration, I'm quoting exactly, better continuity between exam boards and greater freedom to evidence work placement, then I think that they would be more attractive to other providers to take up. I mean, how do you react to that sort of statement from them? And after all, they've been in it since the beginning. They've had a lot of students through their college, still got a lot of students doing a lot of T-levels. How do you react to those comments?
I think that's a really helpful list of feedback that we should sit and work through. I mean, again, not quite a lot of that is familiar, and there are things that we're doing to work on that set of issues. I mean, there's a sort of overarching standback theme, which is how do we make this easier for people to do? How do we remove barriers? How do we try and keep addressing the sort of burdens and bureaucracy that are not kind of intimate to it being a kind of high standards, highly effective qualification? And a lot of the work that we've been describing has been about trying to kind of take that feedback, learn, assess, develop and improve as much as we possibly can as we go along. And I mean, always really happy to talk to college principals and others about how we can be doing more. So I think my response is thank you for the feedback, and we'll pick it up.
Well, thank you very much for your evidence today. I think you'll see that this, or hopefully you've gained from that this committee is very enthusiastic about T-levels as a way of filling some of the skills gaps in technical subjects that we definitely have in this country, and we see time after time in our hearings here. So can I thank you very much for your time and your evidence. An uncorrected transcript of this hearing will be published on the committee's website in the coming days. Of course, the committee will consider the evidence that you've provided, and we will produce a report with recommendations in due course. But again, thank you very much indeed.